Okay, well, I'm Claire Wasserman, founder of Ladies Get Paid. We are an educational platform and global community that is all about helping women advance professionally, financially. I love my job. I hope everybody here loves their job. And if they don't, we have resources to help you get there. And of course, make more money too. Now that we are officially ready to go, I'm just going to jump right into it. But before I give the virtual floor over, I do want to set up some context for the conversation. It's in honor of National Disability Employment Awareness Month, which I'm going to welcome Taryn or anyone else here who wants to talk about specifically that month and what it means. But the goal really is to help those who are listening or watching. How do we make sure that if you are somebody who identifies as disabled, how do we make sure that you know your rights? Your rights in the workplace? How do we also talk about showing up as fully and as authentically as you can? So it's not just about the rights, but it's also about the culture of inclusivity, right? And how do we speak up for ourselves, but also for anybody else, no matter how you self-identified, we all need to be contributing to cultures of inclusivity. And people submitted fabulous questions. And I love that because this can be a sensitive subject. You could see me earlier sweating about the closed captioning. I'll ask all those questions that you sent in. And so same thing now, if you want to put it in the chat, you want to message me privately, this is the time. This is a wonderful group of people here who are going to be very transparent with you about their own stories, but also candidate advice that we all need to hear. And let's just start actually with each of you, maybe talking a little bit about your journey, and how you got into this kind of advocacy work. And maybe I'll jump off here with Emily V, because we have two Emilys, because the whole impetus of this event did begin with Emily V. And I'm going to have you say your last name because you're going to pronounce it better than me. But Emily is the Assistant Director in the White House Office of Public Engagement and the administration's liaison to disabled Americans. She was also participated in Pete Buttigieg's campaign for president. And I'm going to ask you about what it was like to be Chasten. Chasten is his husband, what it was like to be his body woman. And for anybody who's watched Veep, you probably know who I'm talking about, but I want to hear a little bit of the behind the scenes. So Emily V, welcome to the conversation and would love to learn a little bit about you.
There we go. It wasn't letting me unmute myself. So thank you so much, Claire. My name is Emily Vordey, and I am an Associate Director in the White House Office of Public Engagement, specifically serving as our liaison to disabled Americans. So I myself am a woman with a disability. You can't see it in the frame, but I use a manual wheelchair. And so I was born with my disability, but I am transparent with folks that I don't think I really came in to that full identity, that full understanding until my late teens and early 20s. And of course, I'm still learning what it means to be disabled, what it means to be a disabled woman, but take so much pride in being able to share that identity in the work that I do, both personally and professionally. So it's really, really great to be here. My background is in education. I'm a former classroom teacher, student of education policy, and then, as Claire mentioned, was on the campaign trail for a bit in the 2020 primary before landing here in the White House. So it's phenomenal to be here. Really looking forward to digging in more. But I will turn it over to my colleague and friend Taryn. We can just go down the line here with introductions.
I was about to ask about that mute. Hi, everyone. I'm Taryn Williams. I serve as the Assistant Secretary for Labor for Disability Employment Policy, and I am fortunate enough to be the lead of an agency that we often call ODEP, Office of Disability Employment Policy. ODEP's mission is to increase employment opportunities for people with disabilities, and we do that in myriad ways, but really it's through providing leadership, coordination, and expertise across Department of Labor, across the entire federal government, and with the private sector as well. I am someone who lives with ulcerative colitis. or inflammatory bowel disease is sort of the umbrella term there. And I've lived with that since I was 5. And then in my 30s, so about a decade ago, I also developed arthritis. It's sort of secondary to the bowel disease. I am someone who grew up with ulcerative colitis, but I didn't think of myself as a person with a disability. And I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit in our conversation this evening, but I made it to adulthood without necessarily having all of the knowledge that I needed to understand what would it mean to request accommodations in the workplace. And what helped me, and certainly what is really a critical factor in where I am today and the work that I do today, is that I was fortunate enough to be working with some amazing advocates, like in the cubicle next to mine. When I was first thinking about accommodations, as a woman whose name is Rebecca Coakley. And she and me we're sort of like the same age, but she took me under her wing and really helped me to understand a whole aspect of myself and being a woman with a disability in the workplace. And that has just like helped me immeasurably, both personally and professionally. So I'll just stop there, and I know we'll get into much more in-depth conversation, but that's how I came to be here, and a little bit about who I am. And I will turn it over to the other Emily, who's next in line.
Thank you so much. So many Emilys in, of course, on this call, but also in the disability space. It's kind of amazing, which is very interesting. But I'm Emily Blum, and I'm the executive director of an organization based in Chicago called Disability Lead. And we are an organization that develops and connects leaders with disabilities to civic and professional opportunities. And so I am a person with a disability. I have a movement disorder called dystonia, and have had it most of my life, but didn't really step into that full identity until I was a participant of the program that I lead. So one of the aspects of what we do is we run an annual institute for what we consider emerging leaders. And these are folks who are interested in kind of understanding how they can really leverage their identity in the workplace and civic space to make change. And so, one of the things that I think about a lot, or the analogy that I like to use, is that, growing up, I was very much connected to the disorder organization that, serves patients like myself. And I didn't realize, so I kind of like had my own song, right? I had my own song with my own lyrics. And, when I started meeting people with disabilities and who had strong disability identities, this realization came to me that, like, how is it that all these other people know the lyrics to my song? And that was such a profound moment, and continues to be a profound moment. So I would imagine, even on this call, as we describe our own disabilities, our disability journeys, that we are going to be in tune and in harmony, which is, I think, a really profound moment that I experience all the time. And with that, I'll pass it to Akila.
By the way, first of all, thank you all for sharing your stories, because I'm taking copious notes here of follow-up questions to ask. So you see me looking down, that's what's happening. But also, I just got goosebumps when you said know all the lyrics to the same song. I'm sure other people as well. And that's why these conversations are so important, because oftentimes, no matter who you are or what you're going through, you oftentimes think you're the only one. And it can just be so profound, life-changing to recognize that there is not only others, but a community. Like, there is a community of us. And Dr. Akila Kadej, good friend, one of the editors on my book, we've had her on for many things. And I just thought, is she going to be bothered that I say, hey, what about this thing? You want to do it? And you were like, I definitely want to do this. So welcome to the floor.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. I mean, I feel like when the White House calls, you go. Right? Yeah. Anyone else? Is it just me? Well, happy to be here. My name is Dr. Akila Kadej. I'm the founder and CEO of Change Kadej. We're an organizational development consulting firm. And we happen to dabble in diversity all the way through to anti-racism. I like to say I dismantle white supremacy every day. And it's important to share here in this space because when we talk about disability, it does not include us. We are not a benefit or value when it comes to white supremacy, making sure people have opportunity, access, growth, mobility, literally and figuratively. So we do that. I'm proud to be a Black disabled woman who lives in Oakland, California on Ohlone land. I'm also proud to have visible and invisible disabilities. So like I'm all bandaged up today and I'm taped in lots of places. Today I have a pile of braces next to me. I'm sitting on a donut. So I am new to the disability space. I was diagnosed with a rare heart condition about 4 years ago called coronary artery spasms, which means my body thinks it's having a heart attack all day, every day. All these drugs around me. So as a result of that, I can have weakness in my left arm. I can have shortness of breath. I can also be a falls risk. And so as you can imagine, people don't necessarily see that. So I have to communicate that, hence the importance of uplifting and highlighting invisible disability. But because I'm a Virgo and fully committed to being disabled, I was diagnosed with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome in May. So for many of you, you may or may not know what that is, but essentially it is another rare disorder, overachiever, where there's a lack of collagen in my body. And that presents in how easily I can get cuts or bruises, but more importantly, how my joints work. So that's why I have lots of bandages on my body. My body likes to subluxate and dislocate. So all the time, my joints will do that. It takes a long time for things to heal. And I live in chronic pain. I have a hypermobile spine, so I get injections once a month. I have 3 different physical therapists. I really lean into the life. And so depending on how my body shows up, I can move into having visible disability. So I, in a way, have the best of both worlds, as I like to call it, because when I roll up into VIP parking, which you may know as ADA parking, I get judged. And I have the choice to educate or not educate. But again, people can't see things within me. So I take all of that work when I'm consulting with billion-dollar and million-dollar companies with how they're showing up, not saying things like all hands, because I have the hands, but I can't use them sometimes, but I have a lot to say, and making sure that workplaces can be inclusive, both big and small. So thank you, Ladies Get Paid in my house, for having me today. And it's really wonderful to meet the rest of the panel in person too.
Yay. Yeah, I wish it was in person, but this will do. Emily, Emily V, I feel like I'm, this is in elementary school, but Emily V, when we first started our conversations, I know something that you're passionate about, a big focus of the engagement that you do as part of your work is really getting people to think beyond, as you said, kind of capital D disabled. And that I think will be a big theme for today, since as we've heard from a number of our panelists, this journey of realizing your identity, understanding your identity is maybe something you hadn't yet really absorbed before. Tell us about your work. What do you mean by capital D disabled? This is very weird. I have asked everybody to unmute, but I think once you choose to mute yourself, then I'm going to unmute again. So just give me, yeah. I
learned my lesson this time. I'll stay unmuted. So sorry about that. But yes, thank you for your question. So what do I mean by the capital D disabled? So it's really interesting as we have introductions to all of our panelists here to hear, right, whether you were born with your disability or developed it at some point over your life, that doesn't necessarily dictate when you come into the full identity, right? You are diagnosed, again, either at birth or before or after, but we all kind of come into that moment of self-identification, into cultural understanding, into community on our own time. There's no right or wrong way to be disabled, and that journey is personal, as are so many personal journeys of self-identification. So what do I mean by reaching beyond just capital D disabled? Of course, we always want to celebrate and support and uplift voices of people who are wearing that disability on their sleeve, who are very active, who are proud and vocal about their space in our community. But we also want to be sure that we're reaching beyond that to people who are not yet at the point where they are comfortable self-identifying as disabled, or that have the language, frankly, to identify as self-disabled. I often say, right, that when people think about disability, they often think about somebody who looks like me, meaning somebody that uses a mobility device, somebody that's very visibly disabled. But disability is so much more than that. But it sometimes takes somebody inviting you into that conversation in order to feel like you are part of something larger than yourself. I too love Emily B's analogy of singing the same lyrics to a song, right? You have to be introduced to others and introduced into a community in order to feel more comfortable stepping into it sometimes. So really wanting to reach beyond and say to that person with the new diagnosis, to the veteran returning from service with PTSD, to the mom with the new spinal cord injury, whatever it may be, that you can come into that identity on your own time, and it's going to be a journey and a personal process. But in the meantime, know that there is a White House, there's an administration, there is a set of federal legislation that is here to support you. And you don't need to kind of be waving the flag in order to fit in. So that's really what I mean by the, reaching beyond capital D disability, and something, frankly, that I really enjoy about this role and brings me a lot of energy is just helping to show people who maybe never thought of themselves as part of something larger, that there is a space for them, and to bring it back to our conversation, the conversation that we're having today, that there are protections in place and there are processes in place to ensure that they can thrive.
Taryn, for you, and I see that I can ask you to unmute, so now we're on the right cadence here. You talked about Rebecca, right? This colleague,
Yeah.
and your own journey, right? You acknowledge that, you were 5, you were young, okay? But it took time to recognize, all right, this is an identity for me. If you had if you had sort of come into that identity earlier, how do you think, or would it have changed anything for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. I feel like I would have, I really would have benefited from seeking out a community that had similar experiences to me and sort of knew what it was like going through school, or perhaps like folks who were older than me, who had already entered the world of work and could help me start to think about what does it mean to really like live and work with bowel disease. Growing up, I just really didn't have that, and I'm always amazed now to the extent that online you have these broad communities that have really been developed of folks who are fighting for visibility and sort of giving voice to the barriers they face, both in education and employment, just in everyday life, particularly travel. It's a good question. And I think I probably would have had that sense of community earlier, and I would potentially have had at least some opportunity to really explore, and say these are, or predict maybe these are the accommodations that I might need in the workplace. Or I might have said to myself at some point when I'm working, I'm going to need to ask for this. But frankly, I didn't. I know what my mom helped fight for when I was growing up, but I hadn't yet really come into my identity until I had those experiences.
Yeah, this is, or seeing how other people do it. This is totally random and strange, but hear me out. Dancing with the Stars. Okay, so JoJo, one of the participants. So she's queer, she's dancing with a woman. This is a really big deal. This has never happened before. And there was an interview with Cody Rigsby, who is he is a gay man, and he's dancing with a woman. And somebody asked, well, did you want to dance with a woman? And he goes, I didn't even know. I didn't know it was an option. Okay. So I thought that was very, until you see somebody else do it, or somebody else tell you that it doesn't have to be this way. So I thought that really kind of struck me, beyond the sense of community, just seeing what is possible. Actually, Taryn, I'm going to just stick with you for a second, because this was the big question that everybody asked, sent in, which is, do you need to disclose, your disability or your diagnosis during the interview and the hiring process? We can, of course, then talk about, if you are working at a place and then, what does accommodations look like? but
Yep.
disclosure, how do we handle it?
So yeah, it's a great question. It's a question that we get all the time, and so I just want to like put that out there, and maybe I'll drop into the chat like some information about resources that people can find. But let me just start by saying that like deciding when to disclose can be a difficult choice. It's a very personal choice. And I say this in particular if you have a hidden or non-apparent disability, it can be a dilemma. Under the ADA, you can request accommodations at any time during the application process or while you are employed. You don't have to like do it by a certain time, and if you miss that like that window of time, then you're no longer allowed to. You can request an accommodation even if you did not ask for one when applying for the job or after receiving the job offer. So if the question is, when should you disclose that you have a disability? I think one way to think about it is you should disclose your disability when you need to request a reasonable accommodation. Or when you anticipate that you will need a reasonable accommodation. So it's really sort of thinking about, and again, there's a lot that goes into it. We could probably have the entire conversation this evening be about this, but what am I going to need during the hiring process? What might I need as I am onboarding to this job, and what might I need once I am in the job in order to be successful? Those are some of the questions that you want to ask yourself as you're going through that process.
Anybody else want to jump in here? Akila, do you want to go ahead?
Totally. So I think the other part here is that a lot of what happens with people living with disability is putting the onus on the person with disability. And that is not fair when we have federal protection. So what I do and how we advise our clients is that in these job descriptions, there's a disclaimer that they're happy to accommodate, for people for any reason. So we're happy to make accommodations and to encourage it throughout the process, and also to train the recruiters and hiring managers for that language and not using it as a way to deter from someone moving through the process. The reason why people don't share that they have a disability is feelings of shame, not making it through the process, not feeling good enough, or feeling like they would be treated differently in an interview process. And that's not okay. So it's really important to highlight and uplift if there are employers that are here, people in culture and HR, that you can alleviate that by just having it in the job description. You can alleviate that by having it on the website, and you can alleviate that with the first point of contact for setting up an interview and putting it out there. It's free 99. Mm-hmm. It's literally free 99 to do. I think that's really important. And then getting back to the question that you asked, Taryn, again, I had officially been disabled for 4 years, but hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome I've had all my life. But because it's so rare, people don't look for that. So what looks like a basketball injury was actually hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Like, it didn't make sense, but it does make sense now. So I just want to say, when we think about the system that we live in as people with disabilities, if healthcare, if systems, if the job description was more welcoming and inviting of things, then we would learn how to ask for help. We'd feel confident being who we are. We'd feel much more supported and being able to highlight and uplift our intersectionality that we bring to the table with living with disability. So I just want to make sure that in this discussion that we're taking things to the systemic level and not putting on what we need to do so that we can be seen. Other people need to see us. I see myself every single day.
Emily B., did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Emily B. might need to be unmuted again.
There you go.
Thank you. No, I was going to just really echo that. And I think, I totally agree the onus should not be on the person with a disability. That said, I think that there's a lot of research you can do and go into opportunities eyes wide open. So like, is there a statement of diversity on their website? How does it include disability? Do they have affinity groups? Are there affinity groups for people with disabilities? So I think that there are some things that you can kind of like some context clues you could gather around the culture. How welcoming is it? And that also may help indicate, when those disclosures are, welcomed, appropriate, will feel more comfortable, et cetera, et cetera.
One thing, and this was a panel I moderated probably 4 years ago at this point, and it was a government worker, and she was talking about disclosing mental health, things she was going through. And it was funny at the time when she spoke about it, everyone, you could feel a sigh of relief. Oh my God, somebody's being honest in public about this. Now we're all, this has been somewhat of a silver lining as the conversation around mental health is no longer taboo because of all the things we've had to deal with. But what she was talking about was having an ongoing conversation with her employer about her mental health, because there were times where she had certain depressive episodes, but she couldn't say on this date this was necessarily going to happen, right? So it was a bit amorphic. And I think, Emily V, this was something you had written to me earlier when you sort of listed out thinking beyond the capital D. You said mental health. So I don't know if anybody here wants to jump in and speak maybe specifically to that, because if I had to pick the one thing that might be universal amongst many of us right now, it is going through some kind of mental health. I don't even want to say challenge, because I'm on antidepressants myself, so it's just a part of life. But is there anything anybody wants to speak to about navigating and maybe a diagnosis like that can change over time, and how do you open up the dialogue?
Well, you want to go, Emily?
No, I was just going to say, I think so much, Claire, of just you opening that wide open is half of the realization, right? Or kind of half of the battle that we face. Is, you're completely right. While conversations have begun to occur and we're slowly kind of destigmatizing mental health, the next step, right, is helping people understand, people on this call, people across the country, that while they are grappling with this, maybe it's a old reality or new reality, again, there are protections in place. And in this case, mental health diagnoses are protected under federal law, under the ADA, and they are grounds for accommodation. So that it sounds self-evident if that is something that you're familiar with, but just getting past that first hurdle, kind of that first realization, is huge. And again, you don't have to have it all figured out. You don't need to have language for it. You don't need to know when it's going to end or when it's going to begin. But know that in the meantime, there are protections in place. And Taryn, I'll turn it over to you, because I know I cut you off there.
Oh no, you're good. Just a couple of things I would add to that. One, just in terms of again, what the formal accommodation process should look like for employers. And I say should, and I'm referring generally to best practice here, but an individual doesn't have to say ADA. They don't have to say accommodation or even a reasonable accommodation. Technically, and again, I'm talking best practice here. They can request that I might need something in relation to what is a disability, and that starts what is and something that we work with a lot of employers on, which should be an interactive process. And we're talking about mental health here. I would say that with a lot of accommodations and or disabilities, we would say that best practice is an interactive process, because one, there's no one size fits all sort of accommodation for a disability or even for a person. As someone who lives with arthritis, I mean, I have flares, right? It's sort of a chronic thing that, sometimes I really do need. When I was in the office, I needed my standing desk. And other times I didn't need my standing desk. My pain and fatigue levels were different. And so, something that we talk about with both employees and employers alike is that part of that engagement and that interactive process is where you really have a conversation and an ongoing process where you identify what types of accommodations a person might need, and you understand that process may not be static, or that accommodation may not be static. The only other thing I would add to that is I do think we're talking about mental health much more. I would say that we have a lot of work to do with employers around mental health. Employers, they said that 5 years ago. I worked in the agency before, and they would say, we don't really understand or know what we can do to support mental health in the workplace. And I would say that is still the case now. So I do think it's becoming perhaps less taboo, but we're still grappling with a lot of stigma, and we still spend a lot of time working with employers to be like, what does it look like to have a really inclusive workplace that includes accommodations for any disability, and that really allows a person to feel welcome in the environment.
I would just add that I live with major depressive disorder. It started because of discrimination in the workplace. Shocker for everyone. But it lives because I live in chronic pain. I'm never going to be in a place where I don't have pain. It's just the level of it. So I have ebbs and flows with it. But I think it's really important that if, we're making accommodations for disability, and like Emily V is saying, there's different types of disability, putting it out there. We have to be careful about our words, right? And how we're using it. And so even if someone is asking for accommodation but aren't necessarily being transparent about it, and I get it, I understand why people aren't being transparent about it, they're tiptoeing around it, then we're putting ourselves in positions where we're like, well, why didn't they do this thing? We have federal protection to have conversations. The problem is there's a lack of accountability with federal protection. So let's think about that. So it's very easy for people to report to EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunities Commission, if, and I'm seeing stories in the chat here of showing up to an interview and then all of a sudden not getting it. I walk with a cane from time to time. And it's bedazzled with MF Boss on it. If people are going to stare, they should know who I am. But that's the thing that's important here. If you aren't getting the opportunity, this is where we can advocate for ourselves, sure. But what is happening on the federal level for doing audits? Because all employers have to collect the information of who they're seeing. Once someone asks for accommodation, that's part of the record for whether the person's hired or not. So what's the auditing process that's happening there? What's the accountability that's happening there? Want to compare it to AC8, Affordable Care Act. The reason why public-facing hospitals had to change the way they deliver care is because money was tied to it. Money was tied to it. Because of that, they had to think about, well, what's customer service at the public hospital? What does that look like? But we don't have that for ADA. And I think that's important to share. That isn't really there. It's been years upon years upon years to get legislation there. Years upon years upon years to have the language there, but it's not really enforced. It's really up to the employer, which is why we're having this conversation, because we're being told right now that it's still up to us with how we show up into space. So if we're saying we're disability light, that takes away from the disability movement of how we're proud to be disabled. We just had Disability Pride Month. So all of that doesn't make any sense. So what can happen with the person, institution, entity that has the most power and privilege to really change how we're able to be valued and seen, instead of things like chronically capable, like different things that are set up for ways in which we can be employed. I'm very passionate about this because if I didn't have the company I built for myself, I wouldn't be able to go to the up to 5 different appointments I have in the week. I wouldn't be able to sit on the couch with a heating pad. I wouldn't be able to cry in front of my team when I'm in unbearable pain. But I had to create that for myself so I can exist. That doesn't make any sense. So if we're protected, then why are we fighting to get the very money that we can't get if we go fully on disability? That doesn't make any sense. So we have to think about what's the humanity aspect here? What momentum can we take from, all the stuff that's happening in the world to really put more towards how we can be seen, valued, and appreciated, so that we don't have to do so much to be exhausted and tired and not rest and recover to, do all these things and not feel like we can be ourselves in the workplaces of the workplace that we need so we can pay our co-pays or whatever it is to do what we have to do. And that's really what I want to challenge everyone on, and also the White House on that too, because there's a lot more that I know is happening, but can be done.
I don't know if any of you want to react to that. I was going to just pull in, and thank you for, those are all excellent points. I do know that Lorinda, who was so kind to share this event on her LinkedIn, this is kind of worst case scenario. So Lorinda said, that she has had recruiters shun her when she tells them that she has to work remotely due to her disability, or, they discontinue interest in recruiting her. This has happened to her multiple times. Crash that I've been denied employment for disclosing many times. They don't say it, right? Well, right. So this feels a bit like gaslighting too. Like, is this actually happening? So what constitutes discrimination? And let's talk a little bit about those worst case scenarios, and then we can get into maybe better case scenarios.
Well, if you're a protected class, Claire, if you're a protected class, you're protected through the Department of Fair and Equal Housing or EEOC. But if they don't know of that, they can't do an investigation. So that's part of it when we think about workplace 101. And then I'll stop talking because I've been talking a lot.
I don't know if Emily or Taryn or other Emily, if there's something, when we talk about worst case scenario, if you're concerned that perhaps you've been discriminated against, like, what's your recourse? What's the next step?
I can talk.
Taryn, do you want to go for it? Yeah.
From an employment perspective, which Akila just sort of alluded to and talked about. So the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is tasked with enforcing the employment provisions of the ADA. So that's not the U.S. Department of Labor, that's not the Department of Justice, it's the EEOC. So when there is, someone believes that they've been discriminated against, EEOC is the appropriate enforcement agency to contact. And that's where you can find data and or resources about complaints related to disability discrimination. I can say my agency, and by agency, I mean the Department of Labor, but also the Office of Disability Employment Policy, we work very closely with EEOC around guidance, around discrimination, around disability employment. But it is the EEOC where you would go to file a complaint related to disability employment related discrimination.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Emily B., I want to talk to you a little bit about authenticity, because there was something I read that you had written, we focus in the work that you do, so we focus on what is possible when people are able to show up fully as themselves in the workplace, what the employee gains and what the employer gains, and that having a strong disability perspective is a real asset to organizations. It drives innovation, creativity, problem solving, but it requires a culture that welcomes and values that. Do you want to just talk to us a little bit more about that? That was a great starting point.
Yeah.
Also, if we want to maybe think about as whether you're a junior employee with not much quote power, or you're somebody who does have real influence at the company to change the culture. So yeah, I'd love to hear any stories you have or advice on how we can get to it.
I think that part of like my own stepping into my disability identity was really kind of turning the story around, right? So we are taught as children by our parents, the people who like love us the most, who care for us the most, that, disability, like you're a great kid despite disability, right? Like, I think we hear this like, despite, I don't really see disability. And I think we're not taught that disability is in many aspects a good thing, a really important perspective. And so I think, part of the reason why Taryn, Emily, Akila, and I all have stories about kind of like stepping into this identity is partly because there is this pervasive narrative in our culture that disability is a bad thing. It's a bad word. It's impolite to talk about. And so, there's real power in kind of taking that story back, changing that narrative. And, and I think we all benefit when we do. Certainly people with disabilities benefit, but so do other people. I mean, there's just so many examples of like, the most famous one is like curb cuts, the ramps within sidewalks that allow for wheelchairs to go on sidewalks. But of course, mothers and strollers and, travelers with suitcases, everybody benefits from that. And there's just so many countless examples of that in society today. So that's kind of what I mean about like really kind of leaning into that disability perspective. And the thing is that, I totally, understand that struggle or that the other narrative that like you may not have a lot of power within your workplace, but I really challenge that because I have seen the change that workers and consumers have demanded of organizations, especially as it comes to gender equity, racial equity, and I think that like disability is just like a little bit behind that, but like the next way. So how is disability being represented at leadership tables is a question I think anybody should be asking their manager, their bosses. It's certainly something that I look at a lot and think about a lot. How is disability being represented in this company, organization, nonprofit, government? Because I think, or my organization is really built on the belief that when more people with disabilities are at leadership tables, we will all experience better outcomes. And so I think that that's a totally worthwhile question to pursue as a junior employee who may not feel like they have a lot of power. I think that that's really where we see a lot of change happening today.
Do you have an example at all from either your own life or from the people that you've worked with where you have seen somebody make a change, you know, in their leadership, whether they were the ones in the leadership making the change or not, where there was a shift in culture and what happened after that?
You know, if one of my members heard me tell this story, they would probably die of embarrassment, but it's so incredibly powerful. So she works for the state of Illinois, and she has a pretty senior level position with the Department of Health and Human Services. And because of her, people in Illinois with disabilities were prioritized as part of the vaccine rollout. And because of her, the state of Illinois no longer has contracts that support sub-minimum wage employees. And that is life-saving. Like that shows like the economic power potential of people with disabilities. That is life-saving. So maybe not like this is just so top of mind because like this impacts like my life and the lives of so many people with disabilities that like I can't stop talking about it. And again, she probably her ears are like on flames and she's like, no, you know, and of course it's like group efforts, like, you know, there's not a, but, you know, she is a woman who has an incredibly strong disability identity. And I know she used that to fight to make change in the state of Illinois.
I think I'll add to that too. I know earlier I said, you know, and I believe it, that self-identification disability is very personal. You don't owe it to anybody to identify or to share that in any given room. But just know that wherever you sit in an organization, whether it be in a very senior role or a junior level role or as an intern, whatever it may be, there is bravery in self-identification in a space that you feel comfortable and safe. And that incremental change, being able to share that little bit about yourself in the hopes that others around you feel comfortable doing the same, right? There's power in that. One more person that you're in, workplace community with feeling empowered to think, yeah, you know, I've never thought of it before, but my struggle with depression or my Crohn's disease or whatever it may be, that is a disability and it is something that I can use that can be empowering and that gives me voice and gives me agency. So never underestimate, you know, your ability to create space and to create incremental change and to find community in that, even in the workplace, regardless of your title or role.
I mean, Emily, I think about the kids who were your students. I mean, the profound like impact that like having a teacher with a disability had on your class, like that's profound and like life changing. Absolutely.
I would love actually, do you want to talk a little bit about that, Emily? And I know somebody had submitted a question specific actually to advice or recommendations for individuals working in higher education, but it was about supporting students with disabilities. But we'll maybe start, with what was your experience as a teacher?
Sarah, can I interject just really quickly, because off of what Emily V is saying, words are very powerful, which is why it's important for people to say they're non-disabled, so people feel more comfortable saying they're disabled, because it normalizes the discussion. And it's important to do. So when I realized I'm like, oh, I'm disabled, I initially thought like people would treat me differently because I'm disabled. And to a certain extent, yes. but there's a lot of power, like Emily V is saying, with saying and talking about who you are. Because the more that it's in our narrative and our discussions and our culture, and it's just seen as another way to live, the easier it will be. And also what Emily B said, moving the disability discussion up to at least kind of like civil rights 1964 or LGBTQ plus 2008, they're at least moving it into the position where things can happen and we can feel proud to do it, which is why Disability Pride Month is really important to uplift, just like this month too. So people can talk about why we're so special and great. And as I like to say, how we keep being amazing.
Taking notes.
I love so yeah, no, and I infrequently turned down an opportunity to talk about my students. I was a second grade classroom teacher, but probably a little more topical to the question that was asked by the audience is actually I also spent some time working to support college-age students in academic accommodations, not workplace accommodations, but with that kind of young adult population. And I can say, for those of you working to support students, just giving them power and voice, again, if they don't even yet have the words for it, being a listening ear before anything else, especially when you're coming into this identity, you have to be reminded that, again, I've said it already, but that there's no right or wrong way to do it. There's certainly language that is unacceptable. There's certainly preferred language. There's certainly kind of best practice, but being shut down and told that what you're doing or how you are perceiving your own disability is wrong is not going to help, particularly a child or a young adult best, articulate their disability in the future or come into their identity in the future. So really just being a listening ear, telling them that you are there to support them if you're comfortable and if the relationship is appropriate, feeling empowered to self-disclose your own disability or lack thereof, and just really helping them understand that they are not alone in this. I worked, as I said, with college-age students, and so many of them would take their Zoom meetings with me or their phone calls with me from their car in the parking lot of their dorm, or at a student's point, take a call in the closet of their dorm room because they felt so much shame about this new diagnosis or this identity, and just reminding them that they are not alone, and that that there is strength with time, and so that would be my advice, I guess. And I would love, Taryn has been mentoring for a lot longer than I have in this space. Emily, you as well as Akila. So would love your thoughts on working with younger populations, but that would be my starting point.
I'm going to just ask a question that was put in the chat. I think it's an important one, and I welcome, anybody who wants to answer it. This is from Ashley. So Ashley, I'm sorry to hear that you were recently diagnosed with acute leukemia, which required her to leave for 6 months from her work. So there's a good chance that I will not be able to, quote, hustle. I appreciate you put that in parentheses in quotations. Hustle as hard as I once did when my needed accommodations are less straightforward, right? It's kind of earlier question of like when things are like moving and changing. How do I navigate expectations if hired back by my previous employer? And then the second question is kind of the legal definition here. Would an acute cancer diagnosis be considered a disability or fall under the ADA? But let's maybe tackle that first part. I guess navigating these conversations about accommodations when it's less straightforward. So I know, again, we touched on it a bit earlier, but if any of you want to respond to her, I welcome that.
I can answer just off the top quickly. Yes, an acute cancer diagnosis is a disability, and I see Taryn and others nodding as well. So I have been talking a lot also, so I'll turn it over to somebody about navigating those conversations. But yes, disability under the law is a diagnosis that substantially limits one or more major life activities, which I know is very legalese, but is intended to empower you to know that, yes, a lot of things that we do not consider disabilities diagnoses are frequently or are applicable under the law.
Yeah, I would just build on what Emily said. The definition is really broad, and it was intended to be so to really help people with chronic health conditions like asthma or diabetes or mental health conditions, which we were talking about earlier, to ensure that they can be protected. So it's something that we talk about a lot with both employers and employees alike, is that even if you don't think of yourself as having a disability, you may meet the definition under the ADA. And I say this all the time. We're experiencing this a lot as we do education around long COVID and the extent to which individuals are confronting anxiety, depression, brain fog, so many different symptoms related to long COVID, that even if you're thinking this is not a disability, or I don't know what I might be entitled to, that it absolutely can be something that can allow you to request accommodations in the work process.
Yeah, I will just add to that I use my existence as a way for people to know that disability is okay, and it shows up in different ways. And I'm doing that through social media. I'm doing that with being in Vogue. I'm doing that with being in Forbes. I'm doing it in ways in which you wouldn't normally see someone to be seen, which I think is incredibly powerful. But also telling my story of acceptance of disability along the way too. Like, I'll never forget when I was like using a temporary placard, the red placard, just temporary placard, ADA placard. And then my doctor sat me down and was like, Akila, it's time for the blue placard. And I'm like, no. Because if I got the blue placard, that meant that my life was now this. And I wasn't really ready to accept that. I was hoping it was like the initial heart infection, not the lifelong change. But when I realized, it's like, okay, I went from red to blue. I'm blue now. It's automatically sent to me every 2 years. And there was a different amount of confidence that came in something as simple as a placard that I can show up in spaces in which particularly younger people can see. And even though I'm a change maker and disruptor and all these other things, I think the most important part is that someone can see someone who's stylish and fashionable and who cusses and works on really cool projects and lives a life to feel like they have a place to be seen, or a place where they can go to aspire to, or work towards, or maybe I can even help them get to where they have to go. And I think that's really important.
The only thing I would say or add on to that is, I think it's helpful to, part of what you're going to have to do is educate your employers around accommodations, right? So if you were blind or going blind and you needed a screen reader and your organization or company needed to invest in that, that would probably be like an easy accommodation for them to make. So, for you, it sounds like more time is going to be needed to complete tasks. And like that is the same. And I think you articulating it as being the same, or needing a special chair to accommodate, or whatever that accommodation is. Like I think when employers get their hackles up when they hear that it's like time or schedule, but like I think they need to also understand like that is the same. That is the same as a chair, as a screen reader, as cab rides, or whatever that is. Like, and unfortunately, that's on you to help educate them. But like that I think is the case that I would make.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to highlight that the pandemic has changed things. Pandemic gets on my nerves for so many reasons, but the simple fact that there's more accommodations, and remember the accommodations were made for non-disabled people. The things that are happening right now today for some people, some of us have been asking for a while. And so that's another way of keeping that accountability and momentum going with your employer. It's like, hey, clearly you ran your business for a whole year and nothing you made money, or some people made more money as a result of that. So as people are going back into offices, then you can do like what Emily B is talking about, the different types of accommodation to see the outcome can be the same, which is doing the work.
last thing, and thank you all so much for sticking with us. We had the same number of participants the whole time. So I'm feeling great, and I hope you all too. And I have learned so much and been really a lot of goosebumps happening today. Resources. So 2 things I'd like to just end on. Any suggested resources you all have, might be just easier to drop it into the chat. We'll also be sending the transcript to everybody. Resources that you just think everybody should know, whether it's about the workplace or not. And then what are you each, this is going to be a long answer, but let's try to make it short. What are you each working on that you're really excited about, that you want to share? So maybe we'll start, Emily V, any resources off the bat that you think would be helpful for folks based on this conversation, and something you're working on that you're really passionate and excited about?
Yeah, awesome. I will give a plug to what I anticipate might be Taryn's answer, but my go-to, my kind of Bible for all of this is the ODEP website, and specifically askjan.org. And Taryn can tell you more about this, but that's askjan.org.
She phenomenal. Put it in the chat. You're a good tag team, as you were saying. It should
Great. I'll let you explore it for yourselves, but it just has seemingly indefinite number of very accessible, very digestible resources for both employees and employers. Again, whether this is your 50th time requesting accommodations or your first. So I reference that back to that personally and professionally all the time. What I am working on, just building out this network, again, trying to engage literally in the public engagement, reaching beyond kind of that surface level, those folks that have always been engaged in this space, to folks that are just coming into this identity. You are welcome to connect with me through social media if you're interested in staying more involved. I'm at my official hashtag Twitter is, or official Twitter handle is at Vordey, the number 46. So my last name, number 46. I would love to stay involved with you all on this call, help us to build out, this network of disabled Americans.
Thank
you. And Taryn, do you want to, that was a good segue for you.
Yeah, sure. So I dropped it in the chat, askjan.org. It is a website and really a resource. It's confidential technical assistance. So like you can call them, you can email them, you can text with them about questions related to accommodations. I've used it as an employee, I've used it as a manager, I've used it in thinking about like what sort of accommodations do we need in like performance management, right? Like what does that look like? And so I always recommend it. It also like helps you like form the questions that maybe like sometimes when we're reeling from like a new injury or like our condition has changed in ways that we just totally didn't predict, right? Like I go to JAM because they can like give me the language to really sort of think about what might I need, or I can talk to someone who can help me say like, this is like what you might want to ask your employer for. So I put that in the chat. And then in terms of what I'm really energized about. So this is something we haven't talked about, but it's something that I think a lot about is something we call competitive integrated employment. And that is, there's a lot of conversations about wages going on in our country right now, rightfully so, and about sub-minimum wage and like the tipped wages. And part of this conversation, and I think about it because it's called Ladies Get Paid, but a part of this conversation is that there are people with disabilities who are making pennies on the hour. They're getting paid sub minimum wage, but like I think we are in a moment where we are like fighting for folks to get competitive integrated like wages, where they are working alongside folks who are not disabled and they are earning wages that are commensurate with the work that they're doing. That is something my office spends a lot of time on. It is something that like really, really energizes me. So I know that was sort of not something we talked about tonight, but when like people ask me like what energizes you, it's fighting for folks to get paid what they're owed. So I would just throw that out there.
Well, that should have been more of our focus. So, at least we got it in a little bit. But, as with so many of these events, it's like each question that's asked could have been its own topic, So I'm always proud of the fact that we can keep this within time, which of course now we're 5 minutes over, but no rush. Emily B, welcome you to the floor, and then we'll close with Dear Dr. Cadet.
So I mentioned there's a bunch of Emilys in the disability space, but Emily Ladeau has a new book. I'm going to put her website here called Demystifying Disability. And I think it's a really great source on how to be an ally, how to make the world more accessible and inclusive. And, I think just a general message that seek out more disabled authors, artists, culture. That's my request for this for all you folks. And the thing that I'm excited about, not necessarily connected to employment, but knowing that so many issues that we care about are incredibly intersectional. We are currently launching a community of practice, a space that we're calling the Collab to center racial equity and disability justice. And how can we bring practitioners of both together to be in more constant dialogue, to create relationships and friendships, which we kind of recognize, at least in Chicago, don't exist at the rate that they should, and what is possible if by knowing each other, working alongside each other, can we create to make our community more inclusive, accessible, equitable, all those good things. So that's what I'm excited about.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I had read an article, the op-ed you wrote for Juneteenth. You'd written it for the 19th for Juneteenth. I'm going to post that in the chat. And it's beautifully written and it speaks to what you just mentioned. So thank you. Thank you for that. All right, Dr. Akila Cadet, resources, what you're excited to work on, and we will all go back to enjoying
I'm
our.
just going to +1 on all the resources that were shared, and then remind everyone of their patient navigators within their respective systems, and seeing what they may already know for you or what they can do for you for some of your individualized questions and how you're showing up, because that part is important too. And then I'm excited about my educational platform that will be launching soon called the Change Cadet Action Network, which is empowering people to see what can they do, get it CCAN, to make the world a better place. The platform is centered in my intersectionality, and I'm very proud to be a disabled Black woman. So I'm hoping to have more tools for people to also take advantage of in a very healthy and autonomous way.
Yay. Well, thank you all so much for being here. ladiesgetpaid.com. If you'd like to join our network, we've got over 100 hours of educational content in our video library. We do events like this every week. We also have a book, Ladies Get Paid. You can find it at ladiesgetpaid.com/book and on social media. Ladies Get Paid. Thank you all so much for being here, whether you were live, you were watching it after the fact, and it's also going to be on YouTube and all of the good things, transcripts, everything. I appreciate all of your time, to our panelists, and for you all being here. Have a wonderful rest of your day.